Access modifiers or access specifiers are keywords in object-oriented languages that set the accessibility of classes, methods, member functions, member variables. Access modifiers are a specific part of programming language syntax used to facilitate encapsulation of components. It defines the accessibility of a specific type. There are 5 types of access modifiers in C#. As you can see right here, we have public, private, protected, internal, and protected internal. Typically, the first 3 are what you're going to utilize in your C# program. You will utilize these access modifiers on your variables, on your methods. These are all utilized within your ASP.NET Core application. For the first item, as you can see, inside and outside of the assembly, with inheritance and with the type, you can utilize public, and it can be accessed within all of the collections of classes. So any variable, method, or class associated with the public identifier are accessible anywhere inside of the type, example, your class, outside of the type, in another class file, inside of an assembly, outside of an assembly, through inheritance, or with the type, an instance of the type of the class if it's static. So public allows whatever variable, method, or class to be accessible within other classes or other instance of objects associated with the public identifier. The second one on this table you can see is private. And you can see that it's not accessible inside or outside of the assembly with inheritance or with the type. Private members are only accessible within their own type. So if you have a private variable, as we did in our first class, if you try to initialize that variable in another class file, you're going to get a runtime error because with the private identifier, it must be only accessible within its own class. The third item we have here is protected. Protected is only accessible within its derived classes, whether it's inside or outside of an assembly. If you're utilizing inheritance from one class to another, and you have a variable type or method associated with the class that you're inheriting from, you can utilize and initialize those objects associated with that class. Only if your class is inheriting from another class are you able to access those different types and methods associated with the class you're inheriting from. Internal and protected internal are similar to some extent. The only difference is that protected internal, you're outside of the assembly that you're associating with. You can utilize with inheritance the different identifiers on that class. So internal members are only accessible within the assembly by inheritance or by an instance of the object. So only within its own assembly associated with inheritance and its type are you able to access the different properties, the different methods, and the different variables associated with that specific class. Protected internal is the type of access modifier that contains protected member properties as well as internal member properties. This means that protected internal member accessible inside the assembly in its derived class or with the instance of the class and accessible outside the class only if it's derived. In most cases, the first access modifiers that you'll utilize in any application is public, private, and protected. In rare cases, you may use internal and protected internal, but the main focus is that these are the different access modifiers that you can utilize in C#. Typically, what you'll do in an application is set variables to private and then associate them and initiate them on public methods or on specific properties. So we'll have a private variable, let's say it's an int type named hello int, and then with an initiation property associating get and set that is public to associate with our private variable, and then we'll initiate that public property on our class because we don't want direct manipulation on our variables associated with it. So these are the different access modifiers we can utilize in C#. I wanted you to have a conceptual overview of how these things associate in our application. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture. Have a nice day.